The old war memorial hall stood like a sentinel over the rolling plains of Aurion, its once pristine crystal walls now dulled by the passage of time and scars of past battles. Inside, Commander Zyker faced an audience of wide-eyed recruits, their youthful faces betraying equal parts eagerness and trepidation. Zyker's voice, deep and rough from years of shouting commands over battlefield chaos, carried through the hall. Let me tell you a truth that many in the galaxy forget. War is not glory. War is not honor. War is survival, and survival leaves scars that never fade. He gestured to his exoskeleton, a patchwork of pale green and deep jagged scars. I've been through more wars than I care to remember, and I've seen what happens when arrogance blinds an empire. The recruits, seated in neat rows on cold metal benches, listened intently, their admiration of the decorated commander tempered by the weight of his words. Among them sat Terra Rax, the youngest of the group, her antennae twitching with barely restrained excitement. She had grown up on stories of Zyker's heroism, tales of his victories over the Galactic Empire, and his legendary wit. Seeing him in person felt surreal, though his grim tone was far from the glory she had imagined. Zyker turned and pointed to a holographic projection of Aurion, its lush forests and sparkling seas spinning in slow rotation. This was our home 20 years ago, before the Empire came. We were a peaceful people, content to live and let live. Then they came, demanding tribute, resources, and obedience. The hologram shifted, showing images of towering Empire warships descending through Aurion's atmosphere. Fire rained from their cannons, devastating entire cities. They thought we would surrender without a fight, Zyker continued, his mandibles clicking in anger. They underestimated us. And that was their first mistake. A ripple of murmurs passed through the room as the hologram changed again, showing images of Aurion's guerrilla fighters ambushing Empire troops in dense jungles. We didn't have their technology, Zyker admitted, pacing the length of the hall. But we had our world. We knew its secrets, caves that swallowed entire squads, flora that could poison a soldier's bloodstream in seconds. We used every advantage, every trick, and every sacrifice to turn their strength into a weakness. He paused, his multifaceted eyes locking onto the recruits. But make no mistake, victory came at a cost. The hologram flickered to images of smoldering cities, fields of rubble, and the mass graves of Aurion's fallen. Terra felt her chest tighten as she stared at the faces of civilians, young and old, who had paid the ultimate price. She had only been a hatchling during the war, her memories limited to the distant hum of explosions and the frantic whispers of her parents. Zyker's voice softened. The Empire retreated, licking their wounds, but we were left with scars deeper than any weapon could inflict. Families broken. Lives shattered. All because one empire believed their strength made them invincible. A moment of heavy silence filled the hall before a low buzz broke the tension. Zyker's second-in-command, a sharp-eyed Aurion named Curve, approached with a handheld communicator. He whispered something into Zyker's ear. Zyker's expression darkened. He raised his voice. Listen closely, recruits. You were born into a fragile peace, but peace is never guaranteed. The Empire has never forgotten their humiliation, and now we have confirmation. They are mobilizing again. A scout has reported sightings of an Empire fleet gathering near the border. The room erupted in murmurs, recruits whispering to one another in alarm. Terra's heart pounded, her excitement giving way to dread. Zyker raised a claw, silencing them. This is not a cause for panic, but it is a call to prepare. Remember this. Wars are never won by strength alone. They're won by cunning, unity, and the will to endure. The Empire failed to break us once because we fought as one. If they come again, we will show them that Aurion still stands. As the recruits filed out, their chatter subdued, Terra lingered, her gaze fixed on Zyker. She hesitated, then approached him. Commander, do you think we can survive another war? Zyker looked down at her, his expression unreadable. Surviving isn't a question, young one. It's the only answer. And if the Empire is foolish enough to start another war, they'll learn the same lesson they did last time. Never start a war you can't win. Terra nodded, her youthful idealism tempered by the weight of Zyker's words. The old commander turned and walked away, his silhouette framed by the fading light of the memorial hall, a stark reminder of the past and a warning of the storm to come. The chamber of the Aurion Council was alive with tension. The circular room, carved from the crystalline heart of the planet, shimmered with an ethereal glow, but the gathered leaders' grim expressions dulled its beauty. Commander Zyker stood at the center, his posture rigid as he delivered the scout's report. The Empire is rebuilding its fleet, he said, his voice steady but heavy. They've stationed their forces on the borders of neutral space, and they've developed new weapons since our last encounter. This is no bluff. They're preparing for war. The council erupted into heated debate. We must send envoys, argued Elder Varna, her slender frame trembling with emotion. Perhaps this is a misunderstanding. We cannot risk provoking them further. Provocation? Snapped Counselor Morak, his claws tapping impatiently on the crystalline table. Do you think they'll come here for tea and diplomacy? They want to finish what they started 20 years ago. We need to strike first, catch them off guard. Zyker raised a claw, silencing the room. Enough. His voice carried the weight of experience, and even Morak leaned back, subdued. We don't have the luxury of petty arguments. The Empire doesn't negotiate, they demand submission. But charging into battle unprepared is just as foolish. All eyes were on him as he continued. We need intelligence. We must understand their capabilities, their weaknesses. Only then can we decide our next move. The council reluctantly agreed, and Zyker wasted no time assembling a team for the mission. Among them was Terra Rax, her youthful eagerness tempered by determination. This would be her first real mission, and despite her nerves, she vowed not to disappoint the commander. The Empire outpost loomed ahead, a stark metal construct jutting out against the barren asteroid field. Zyker and his team, cloaked in adaptive camouflage suits, moved with practiced precision through the shadows. Terra, stay close, Zyker whispered as they approached the perimeter. This is no training exercise. One mistake could cost us everything. She nodded, clutching her compact energy rifle tightly. Inside the outpost, the team bypassed patrols and security systems, Zyker's leadership and their years of training ensuring a seamless infiltration. They reached the central command hub, where rows of glowing monitors displayed schematics of the Empire's newest weapon, the Graviton Lance, a city-destroying device capable of targeting entire planetary regions. Terra's breath caught as she studied the data. How do we fight something like this? She whispered. We don't, Zyker replied grimly. Not yet. First, we find its weakness. They downloaded the schematics, but before they could retreat, an alarm blared. The outpost sprang to life, red lights flashing as Empire soldiers poured into the corridors. Move. Zyker barked, leading his team through a maze of hallways. Terra covered their rear, her hands steady despite her pounding heart. The team made it to the extraction point, but not without casualties. One veteran, Jorek, stayed behind to delay their pursuers, his final words echoing in Terra's mind. Fight smart. Fight for Aurion. Back on Aurion, the council reconvened to review the stolen data. The Graviton Lance's existence confirmed their worst fears. Zyker addressed them with measured calm. The Empire is stronger than we imagined, he admitted. But they're not invincible. The Lance has vulnerabilities we can exploit, but it will require coordination, sacrifice, and above all, unity. The war has already begun whether we wanted it or not. Now we must ensure we survive it. Terra stood silently at the edge of the room, the weight of the mission heavy on her shoulders. She had seen the Empire's power up close, but for the first time she truly understood what Zyker meant by resilience. The battle ahead would test them all, but she was determined to play her part. As Zyker dismissed the council, he caught Terra's eye and nodded. His approval steadied her, even as the specter of war loomed ever closer. The invasion began at dawn. The Empire's fleet descended through Aurion's atmosphere, blotting out the morning sun. Massive warships cast shadows over the forests, their energy cannons tearing through defensive fortifications. Explosions rippled across the landscape, shaking the ground beneath Zyker's feet as he stood atop the command platform in the Resistance headquarters. Report, he barked, his voice steady despite the chaos outside. Curve, his second-in-command, looked up from the holomap. Their main force is focused on the Eastern Hemisphere. Smaller units are advancing on key cities, targeting supply depots and civilian shelters. They're trying to divide us. Let them try, Zyker said, his mandibles clicking. They underestimate us again. Across the eastern jungles, Aurion's defenders sprang into action. Guerrilla fighters, using their knowledge of the terrain, ambushed Empire troops in dense forests and rocky ravines. Traps sprung from the earth, explosive vines, concealed pits, and venomous fauna, crippling the Empire's ground forces. Terra Rax, now embedded with one of the Resistance squads, held her rifle steady as she lay hidden in the underbrush. The sound of mechanized walkers grew louder, their metal legs crashing through the trees. Wait, her squad leader whispered, holding up a claw. Let them come closer. Terra's antennae twitched nervously, but she followed orders. A convoy of walkers and soldiers entered the clearing, their weapons scanning for threats. At the leader's signal, the resistance fighters unleashed their ambush. Explosives erupted beneath the convoy, flipping walkers onto their sides. Terra fired precise shots, taking down stunned soldiers before they could react. The skirmish was over in minutes, but the destruction around them was a grim reminder of the stakes. As they regrouped, Terra glanced at the distant horizon, where pillars of smoke rose from other battles. Despite their small victory, the Empire's presence loomed. Back at headquarters, Zyker pored over the data from the earlier mission. The Graviton Lance was the key to the Empire's offensive, but its vulnerabilities were few. The weapon's power core was heavily shielded, and any attempt to disable it would require a direct assault on its carrier ship, a near-suicidal mission. Curve approached, his expression grim. We're losing ground in the south. Civilians are being evacuated to the underground sanctuaries, but the Empire's closing in. Zyker straightened, his resolve hardening. We don't have a choice. If we don't neutralize the Lance now, there won't be a south left to defend. He gathered a strike team, personally leading the mission to the Empire's flagship. Terra volunteered, her determination earning her a place in the crew. The assault on the flagship was a desperate, chaotic operation. The resistance fighters infiltrated the ship under heavy fire, Zyker's leadership guiding them through narrow corridors and overwhelming odds. They reached the Lance's power core, its pulsating energy casting an ominous glow over the room. Set the charges, Zyker ordered, covering his team as they worked. The Empire's forces stormed the chamber, and a fierce firefight ensued. Terra found herself back-to-back with Zyker, her aim steady despite the chaos. Hold them off, Zyker shouted as the last charge was armed. The team retreated as the charges detonated, the explosion ripping through the flagship. The Graviton Lance shattered in a brilliant cascade of energy, sending shockwaves through the battlefield. As the team returned to the surface, cheers erupted across the resistance comms. The destruction of the Lance had crippled the Empire's fleet, forcing their retreat from key positions. But Zyker knew the war was far from over. Standing amidst the wreckage, he looked to Terra, who stood silently by his side. Victory isn't the end, he said. It's the chance to keep fighting another day. Remember that? Terra nodded, the weight of his words sinking in. The battle for Aurion had only just begun, but for the first time she felt ready for the trials ahead. Aurion's underground sanctuaries were alive with activity. Families huddled together in the dimly lit caverns, while resistance fighters prepared for the final battle above. The air was thick with the hum of generators and the murmur of quiet prayers. Commander Zyker stood at the center of the main cavern, addressing the gathered fighters. This is our last stand, he said, his voice calm but resolute. The Empire's fleet is weakened, but they won't leave without trying to crush us first. They've committed everything to this assault and so must we. He paused, scanning the room. We're not just fighting for our lives. We're fighting for Aurion itself. If we fall, our world falls with us. Remember the forests we defended, the families we swore to protect. That's what we're fighting for. Terra Rax stood among the crowd, her rifle slung over her shoulder. The fear she had felt during her first mission was still there, but it no longer controlled her. She was ready to face whatever came next. On the surface, the Empire launched their final attack. Troop carriers descended in waves, unloading battalions of soldiers and towering war machines. The remaining Empire commanders, desperate to salvage their campaign, threw everything they had at Aurion's defenders. But the Aurions were ready. Zyker had spent weeks preparing the terrain, turning the planet itself into a weapon. As the Empire's forces advanced, they fell into carefully laid traps. Explosive charges concealed beneath the soil, collapsing cliffs that buried entire squadrons, and swarms of bioengineered fauna that overwhelmed their ranks. Terra fought alongside her squad in the dense forests, her movements fluid and precise. Every shot she fired was calculated, every command she followed executed without hesitation. The lessons Zyker had drilled into her, think before you strike, fight smart, and never lose sight of your purpose, guided her every move. In the distance, Zyker led the main counteroffensive. Flanked by veterans and fresh recruits alike, he directed strikes against the Empire's vulnerable supply lines, cutting off their reinforcements. His presence was a beacon of resolve, inspiring those around him to push through their fear and exhaustion. By nightfall, the battle had reached its climax. The Empire's forces were fractured, their war machines reduced to smoldering wrecks. In a final act of desperation, General Valdar Crick himself descended to the battlefield, leading a charge against the Aurion command post. Zyker and Terra faced him together. Crick's hulking frame towered over them, his mechanical armor bristling with weapons. "You should have surrendered," Crick growled, his voice distorted through his helmet. "And you should have known better," Zyker replied, his voice steady. "Never start a war you can't win." The fight was brutal but short. Using coordinated attacks, Zyker and Terra exploited the weaknesses in Crick's armor, bringing the Empire warlord to his knees. Zyker spared his life, sending him back to the Empire with a single message: Aurion will never fall. The next morning, the sun rose over a battered but still standing Aurion. The surviving Empire forces had fled, leaving the planet victorious. As the resistance regrouped, Zyker stood on a hill overlooking the forests. Terra joined him, her armor battered but her spirit unbroken. "We won," she said softly. "For now," Zyker replied. "But peace is never permanent. What matters is what we do with the time we have." Terra nodded, understanding the weight of his words. The cost of victory was high, but Aurion had endured and so had its people. Together they watched the horizon, ready to face whatever came next.